Fake hoes better hit this dope. Pocahontas, I ain't lying, I'm being so honest. Pretty face, pretty hair, pretty toes. Whoa.
Have you ever heard of the legend of Pocahontas? Well, I am sure you have. Disney's Pocahontas has buried her real story and portrayed her tale into a Romeo and Juliet narrative on the American frontier. The reality was that Pocahontas was a child of 11 years when she met John Smith, who was 28.
Pocahontas was the most dear and well-beloved daughter of Powhatan, the powerful chief of Algonquian Indians in the Tidewater region of Virginia. She was born around 1595 to one of Powhatan's many wives. They named her Matoaka, though she is better known as Pocahontas, which means Little Wanton, a playful, frolicsome little daughter.
In 1607, the first group of settlers arrived in Virginia and dropped anchor on the shore of Chesapeake Bay. 1 month later, the English settlers found a colony of Jamestown at the confluence of Jamestown and Chickahominy rivers. John Smith was one of the first settlers who came to land. Pocahontas visited Jamestown several times and met with Captain John Smith, whom she tutored in her native language.
John Smith was born in Willoughby, England in 1580. He left home at the age of 16 after his father's death. He had dreamed of traveling overseas since he was a young boy. However, his father had plans for him. He wanted him to bow. That all changed when Smith's father died. Now Smith was able to pursue his dreams without discouragement. Smith was a very educated man. He was once a slave, but he was so clever that he beat his master to death and escaped. He fought in the war, and he was wise and had very strong beliefs. One of his beliefs was that he who shall not work shall not eat. He also believed that he had to understand the language and culture of the natives. Smith was a big part in saving Jamestown from famine.
Pocahontas probably saw white men for the first time in May 1607 when Englishmen landed at Jamestown. The one she found most likable was Captain John Smith. The first meeting of Pocahontas and John Smith is a legendary story, romanced by Smith in his letter writings. He was leading an expedition in December 1607 when he was taken captive by some Indians. Days later, he was brought to official residence of Pocahontas, which was 12 miles from Jamestown. According to Smith, he was the first welcomed by a great chief, offered a feast. Then he was grabbed in force and strength out of 2 large flat stones. Indians stood over him with clubs as though ready to beat him to death if ordered. Suddenly a little Indian girl rushed in, took Smith's head in her arms, and laid her own upon him to save him from death. The little girl Pocahontas then pulled him to his feet. Pocahontas said that they were now friends. He would adopt Smith as his own son or a low-ranked chief. Actually, this mock execution and salvation ceremony was traditional with the Indians, and if Smith's story is true, Pocahontas' actions were probably one part of a ritual. At any rate, Pocahontas and Smith soon became friends. Relationships with the Indians continued to be generally friendly for the next year, and Pocahontas was a frequent visitor to Jamestown. She delivered messages from her father and accompanied Indians, bringing food and fur to trade for hatchets and trinkets. She was a lively young girl, and when young boys of the colony turned cartwheels, she would follow and wheel some herself.
She apparently admired John Smith very much, and would also chat with him during her visits. Her lively character and poise made her appearance striking. Several years after their first meeting, Smith described her as a child of 10 years old, which not only for feature, countenance, and proportion much exceeded any of the rest of his Powhatan's people. Unfortunately, relations with the Powhatans had worsened. Necessary trading still continued, but hostilities became more open. While before she had been allowed to come and go, almost at will, Pocahontas' visits to the fort became much less frequent. In October 1609, John Smith was badly injured by a gunpowder explosion and was forced to return to England. When Pocahontas next came to visit the fort, she was told that her friend John Smith was dead. Pocahontas apparently married an Indian, Kocoum, in 1610. She lived in the country among the Indians, but her relationship with the Englishmen wasn't over. When a member of the Jamestown settlement, Captain Samuel Argall, learned where she was, he devised a plan to kidnap her and hold her for ransom. With the help of the chief of the Powhatan Indians, Argall lured Pocahontas onto his ship. When she was told she would not be allowed to leave, she began to be exceedingly pensive and disconnected. but she eventually became calmer and accustomed to her captivity. Argyle sent word to Powhatan that he would return his beloved daughter only when the chief had returned to him the English prisoners he held, the arms and tools that the Indians had stolen, and also some corn. After some time, Powhatan sent part of the ransom and asked that his daughter be treated well. Argyle returned to Jamestown in April 1613 with Pocahontas. She eventually moved to a new settlement, Henrico.
It was here that she began her education in the Christian faith, and that she met a successful tobacco planter named John Rolfe in July 1613.
Pocahontas was baptized as Rebecca and later married John Rolfe on April 5, 1614.
A general peace and a spirit of goodwill between the English and the Indians resulted from this marriage. Sir Thomas Dale made an important voyage back to London in spring of 1616. He brought with him Pocahontas, her husband, and their young son Thomas. The arrival of Pocahontas in London was publicized. She was presented to King James I, the royal family, and London's high society. Also in London at the time was Captain John Smith, the old friend she had not seen for years and whom she believed was dead. According to Smith, she was too overcome with emotion to speak. This was their last meeting.
After 7 months, Rolfe decided to return to his family to Virginia. In March 1617, they set sail. It was soon apparent, however, that Pocahontas would not survive the voyage home. She was deathly ill from pneumonia or possibly tuberculosis. She was taken ashore, and as she lay dying, she comforted her husband, saying, "All must die. 'Tis enough that the child liveth." She was buried in a churchyard in Gravesend, England. She was 22 years old.
Pocahontas played a significant role in American history even though she lived a short life. As a compassionate little girl, she saw to it that the colonists received food from the Indians, so that Jamestown would not suffer the fate of the lost colony on Roanoke Island.
She is said to have intervened to save the lives of individual colonists. In 1616, John Smith wrote that Pocahontas was the instrument to preserve the colony from death, famine, and utter confusion. And Pocahontas not only served as a representative of the Virginia Indians, but also as a vital link between the Native Americans and the Englishmen. So what is the truth of the matter? We will never know. What we do know is that Pocahontas was a real person, and her courage and passion for life helped save many.
Booyah!